Canada is forging a new strategic partnership with China. By building this new strategic partnership, we're creating the stability and certainty needed to catalyze new investment and opportunities for Canadian workers.
It's eyes wide open.
China said on Tuesday it will impose a 73.5% preliminary tariff on imports of Canadian pea starch. Ladies and gentlemen, in January, Mark Carney returned from China and proclaimed that all of our problems were solved. Despite saying that China was the greatest security threat to Canada during the election, he had signed a strategic partnership with China, particularly on agriculture. He said they provided stability, while repeatedly saying that the U.S. was unpredictable. Melanie Joly tried to defend their partnership with China, despite having her own words thrown back at her about how China was a global disruptor. Well, to nobody's surprise, Mark Carney's trust in a totalitarian dictatorship has completely backfired on him. Let's take a look. China slaps 73.5% preliminary tariff on pea starch from Canada. China said on Tuesday it will impose a 73.5% preliminary tariff on imports of Canadian pea starch from July 1st as part of temporary anti-dumping measures after a more than 10-month investigation. The Chinese Ministry of Commerce said its investigation had found that Canadian pea starch was being quote-unquote dumped in China, causing, quote, material injury to the domestic industry, end quote. The probe was launched last August, on the same day China imposed preliminary anti-dumping duties on Canadian canola, escalating a year-long trade dispute that began after Ottawa levied tariffs on Chinese electric vehicle imports. Today's decision shows that trade tensions remain, despite an improvement in relations since January, when Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney visited Beijing and reached an initial agreement to sharply lower tariff rates on Canadian canola imports and to suspend duties on some Canadian agricultural products, including a 100% levy on Canadian peas. Quote, "This new tariff proves the Liberals' trade strategy is a complete disaster," end quote. Conservative critics John Barlow, Stephanie Kuzy, and Eric Duncan said in a joint statement that took aim at the China deal and accused Carney's government of letting down farmers. All right, before we say anything else, let's just go back to January 16th of 2026 and recall exactly what Carney said.
And it's with this approach that Canada is forging a new strategic partnership with China. The second pillar of our strategic partnership aims to increase trade directly between Canada and China. Our agricultural cooperation built the foundation of our bilateral relationship. For more than 6 decades, Canada has been a reliable partner for China in food exports. Canadians export more than $7 billion in agricultural products to China each year. China used to be the largest market for Canadian canola seed. We want to not just return to those levels, but to surpass them. And so I'm pleased today to announce that Canada and China have reached a preliminary but landmark trade agreement to remove trade barriers and reduce tariffs. By March the 1st, Canada expects that China will lower tariffs on Canadian canola seed to a combined rate of approximately 15%. China is a $4 billion canola seed market for Canadian producers, and this change represents a significant drop from the current combined tariff levels of 84%. Furthermore, Canada expects that Canadian canola meal, as well as Canadian lobsters, crabs, and peas, will not be subject to relevant anti-discrimination tariffs from March 1st of this year until at least the end of this year. Together, these results will unlock nearly $3 billion of export orders for Canadian farmers, fish harvesters, and processors as they realize the full potential of this market of 1.4 billion people. We welcome Chinese business plans to significantly scale up their investment in Canada, in major clean energy projects, as well as in agriculture and consumer projects. And by building this new strategic partnership, we're creating the stability and certainty needed to catalyze new investment and opportunities for Canadian workers.
So, China and Canada have worked together to put together an agreement that are going to reduce tariffs on agriculture. That's going to create stability and certainty for Canadian farmers. They're going to invest in Canada and in Canadian agriculture. And when questioned on whether China was a more predictable partner than the United States, recall that this is what he said.
Prime Minister Martinez Davis, New York Times. After your visit, is it fair to say that you're concluding that China is a more predictable and maybe reliable partner to Canada than the United States is today?
Well, let me answer it. I'm going to answer it directly with respect to the relations with China and our engagement with China. And I will say that from the first conversation I had with Premier Lee, telephone conversation, then the meeting in New York, the long meeting with President Xi in Korea, and then the meetings over the course of the last few days. There are a number of specific issues, and I've outlined them that where we've made progress in our strategic partnership. But we spent a fair bit of time in all of those meetings about the guardrails, if you will, of the relationship, where we felt we could cooperate, where we had differences of opinion, where we had differences of view in the system, respecting each other's differences in the system. And that sort of candid and consistent dialogue, frank dialogue, that leads to a more predictable and effective relationship.
Does it? So does that mean you knew or didn't know that the 73.5% tariff levy was going to be slapped on Canadian farmers? It's what Canadian farmers want to know. If this is the type of relationship that creates a more predictable and stable dialogue, then did you know or did you not know? My guess is you didn't know. And my guess is this is coming at a complete surprise. And, China was pretty underhanded in slapping this on Canada Day. What kind of an insult to to us is that? Come on. But, Mark Carney, good thing he's been spending all of his time at the World Cup, right? Now, I just want to go back to Melanie Joly, right? This was a few weeks after Mark Carney had made this announcement, and all of his liberals were going on mainstream media and trying to, say, oh, don't worry, despite the fact that Mark Carney said that China is the most significant threat to Canadian sovereignty. Don't worry, everything's all good here, nothing to see, despite we have eyes wide open.
I remember when you occupied the position of Minister of Foreign Affairs and the centrality of the Indo-Pacific strategy at the time, which I think it was November of 2022, that you announced that strategy. You said that China seeks to shape the global environment at that time into one that is more permissive to interests and values that increasingly depart from ours. The China of 1970, to quote your own words, is not the China of today. China is an increasingly disruptive global power. I understand the point your government has made that the world has changed, that the United States has changed. But, Minister, with all due respect, China has not changed. Why is opening up the market to China a good idea?
Well, first and foremost, we've been victims of the U.S. trade war against us. So our goal is to make sure that we're able to find new markets. At the same time, I must say that it's eyes wide open. We made sure that we would be having guardrails in this important agreement that we've been able to sign with China. Our goal was to resolve a lot of the outstanding issues, which had to be resolved. It was important for canola farmers to be able to have access to the Chinese market, same for our fishers. But at the same time, China is investing around the world and exporting EVs around the world. It is the case in Europe. It is the case also across Asia. What we've done, I think, is something that is very unique, but we believe that it is our way to not only benefit from our great expertise, because we have some of the biggest auto parts companies in the world, Linamar, Martin Ria, Magna, which are all headquartered in Ontario. But at the same time, we think that attracting investments from Chinese automakers working in joint ventures with Canadian companies is the way to really be able to embrace this new technology that has been developed by China and that will be able to offer cheaper EVs and also quality EVs. So not a lot of jurisdictions are able to do that in the world. Magna, Canadian company, is already building for a Chinese company in Austria, XPeng, and they're already in China. So these are just examples of what we intend to do for the Canadian market. And I think that in time, it will be good for the North American market also, but not only the North American market. I really think that because we have 51 free trade agreements with the world, we can export elsewhere.
So, I didn't actually pick up on this the first time that I watched this, but I picked up on this the second time, but I'll come back to that in a minute. So, Vassy Kapelos is throwing Melanie Joly's words back at her. And what she was saying, to summarize, is Melanie Joly was saying that China is a global disruptor, they're unpredictable, you can't rely on them, you can't count on them, and they're not exactly a stable partner. That's what she was saying. And now the Liberals are trying to say, now they are. Which is a bunch of baloney. Now, she goes on to talk about EVs, and she goes on to talk about, what we're doing is unique and blah, 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 blah. I just picked up on one of the other reasons why. Now, maybe I'm just slow. Maybe it's because I was focusing on other things. If everybody else has picked up on this, then I'm just slow to the party. But that's okay. So what I picked up on was this. China is coming into Canada. Now, the U.S. has already been worried about these EVs coming into Canada because they're worried about them coming down from Canada into the United States. We've talked about that. A lot of other people have talked about that. But what I picked up on the end is that she had said we have 51 free trade agreements around the world. We can export elsewhere. Not export Canadian products. Export the Chinese EVs that are coming into Canada. So she's trying to say, they'll be built in Canada and then they'll be exported from Canada to other countries. And she seems to think that that money is going to stay in Canada. So no wonder China was so interested in getting their EVs in Canada, because Mark Carney and the Liberal government seems to have made an agreement that, sure, we'll export your EVs across the world to other countries that don't want your EVs into their countries in the first place, and we'll use our free trade agreements to do it. Ladies and gentlemen, this is all starting to come together now, and it's actually blowing my mind. So, Canada doesn't really have any anti-forced labor capabilities in the country. We've only stopped 2 shipments in the last 5 years. The U.S. has stopped thousands. There's some evidence that the Chinese EVs are made from material that is gathered via forced labor. So this might be a way around it. So you ship these products into Canada. They're assembled in Canada. Canada then exports them to other countries. Because they're not coming direct from China, they get around these forced labor laws, potentially. And perhaps other products come into China or come from China into Canada and then leave Canada through our free trade agreements. Is this why Mark Carney has been signing all these free trade agreements? Maybe, but at the same time, China turns around and slaps a 73.5% tariff on our farmers. This is pretty wild. The more you dig into this and the more you peel back all of the layers of this. So, ladies and gentlemen, Mark Carney was preaching stability. He was preaching certainty. He was trying to say in a backhanded way that China was a more reliable partner than the United States. Melanie Joly was trying to say, we're a victim of this trade war with the United States, which we are. we have a bunch of tariffs slapped on us. I don't like tariffs slapped on us. But he goes and signs this alleged strategic agreement with the Chinese government. Nobody has seen it. Conservatives want to see it, but they won't show it. So this predictability, not even 7 months later, now we get a brand new 73.5% tariff slapped on us. Great job, Mark Carney. Your entire strategy has backfired on you. So, ladies and gentlemen, can we start actually calling this what it is? These quote-unquote agreements that Mark Carney is making are obviously not agreements. They're obviously not really binding, are they? Because if one of the most high-profile ones that Mark Carney came back and announced to Canadians that, don't worry, we've solved all of your problems, if that agreement can seemingly be rearranged by the Darth Vader of the world order right now, which is Xi Jinping in China, I don't know if he's saying to Mark Carney, I'm altering the agreement, pray I don't alter it any further. But if that is the most high-profile agreement he's waving around, then what does this say for any of the non-high-profile agreements? It's smoke and mirrors. They don't mean anything. And all Mark Carney has been able to demonstrate to Canadians is that whatever he does, whatever he builds, is built with masking tape and glue. And you just need somebody to come up and blow on it, and the whole house of cards falls down.